and for the producers who will be back out in the fields for harvest. Our first story this week is just for you. With harvest comes the marketing of the new crop, and it will be crucial that farmers first check with their local grain storage facility to see their discount schedule and unloading procedures. Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson stopped by to discuss some of the finer points of getting to know your 2021 discount schedules with Market Journal's Bill Dodd.
Every grain elevator that receives corn or soybeans will have its own discount schedule. These schedules are important in terms of the way they communicate how and when various factors, such as shrinkage, are applied upon delivery. As discount schedules vary from elevator to elevator, it's important to keep up on any annual changes to the schedule or delivery procedures, especially when it's time to head in for harvest.
You know, this time of year, especially where we've got stocks are tight, and basically what that means is that there's a lot of people looking for the corn, the first corn off the combine, the first soybeans off the combine. What you'll generally find on the discount schedules is that they may be willing to take grain at a higher moisture level, and they may also not discount that grain as much because they want to incentivize the movement of it. So it's important to keep in touch with that. The other thing to watch really closely is what are their maximums on moisture. So maybe a certain elevator normally would only take it up to 20% moisture, but this time of year, maybe if they really want the bushels, maybe they'll take it up to 25%. So keep in touch on that. The other big thing to watch is just to make sure you know what their dump hours are, you know what their harvest hours are, because those could be quite a bit different than what you see during the normal business hours once harvest gets started.
Though some elevators may accept corn that's a bit higher in moisture than usual, it's still important to make sure that your delivery isn't too high where moisture is concerned, especially when things like white corn or other specialty crops are involved.
Yeah, the too high part gets to be kind of interesting. So we'll start off kind of the worst case scenario. You could end up getting the grain rejected and it just doesn't meet the contract specs. And if you're just dealing with at harvest time with just normal number 2 yellow corn, that's one thing. But where we even see some bigger issues than that is, let's say you've actually contracted, say, some white corn or some type of specialty crops. They normally have a little bit lower moisture level, so as a result, you may not be able to meet the contract specs. They may reject the contract. And then in addition to that, you may also have a penalty for getting out of that contract, so that could come into play. The other thing that happens when you bring in moisture that's a little bit higher is the fact that you're going to have discounts that are going to apply to that moisture, and that's going to impact the price that you end up ultimately receiving for your grain.
If the grain is reading too high on moisture content, there are a number of ways your overall sale could be impacted.
Yeah, there is a number of them. Starting first on corn, what we end up finding is that there's some locations that will just shrink the bushels down. So if you think about it, really what that is a quantity discount. So they're adjusting how many bushels of grain you have. So for instance, they might shrink your bushels 3% or 4%. Another very common way, and I'd probably say the most common one, is that they do a shrink of the bushels, which is about 1.5%. And their logic behind that is that whether they dried those bushels or your bushels stayed out in the field, there's going to be a certain amount of natural shrink that's going to happen. And then on top of that 1.5%, then they may charge a drying charge, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 cents a bushel. Kind of depends on what the cost of natural gas or propane is and those operating costs. So that's one way. We call that a shrink and a dry method. We've also got a percentage of adjustment to the quantity. And the other one that you do end up seeing at times is that where they'll take a percentage of what your contract price is. So it's a adjustment on price, but it's not broke into shrink and drying charge. It's just based on a percentage. That one I'm not probably quite as favorable with or like as much because it depends on where you sold your grain. So if you sold your grain and had a really good price, then it could be costing you more than somebody who maybe is selling at harvest time and the price isn't as high.
On the other end of the scale, being too low on moisture content could mean leaving money in the field.
Yeah, so what you run into is that on corn and soybeans, let's start there on corn first, there really isn't any type of time when too low of a price ultimately impacts your sale, other than the fact that what you're doing is that you're missing out on selling water. So generally what you're looking at is that 15% is kind of the break line on corn and 13% is the break on and on soybeans, and that's where they start their discounts. So what you're doing is you're just not getting as much really weight as you could in the corn example. On the soybean example, it works the same way. Generally, we have a little more problem with too dry of soybeans. Soybeans dry out really fast, so it's really hard to get the beans at 13%. And what's interesting is that how we look at that is that, let's say you haul in something that's say at 12%. What our estimation would be is that if you have 1.5% shrink per point of moisture, you take that 1.5% shrink, and let's say we've got $12.50 soybeans, we're estimating that that would actually cost you, or you'd leave about $9.37 an acre on the table. If you'd have had that up to that 13 level, you'd have picked up. But here's what gets really interesting. You get all the way down to 8% moisture, and actually you're probably leaving about $47 worth of revenue on the table, figuring 50 bushels the acre soybeans.
As harvest begins to ramp up, you'll want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with any changes to your local elevator's discount schedule and delivery policies. This will help ensure that you're putting yourself in the best possible position when it comes to marketing your newly harvested crop. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.